Fucking nailed this video thing by now. One taken, done. So we've gone through a fairly long process at this point. Hopefully over the last several weeks, you've begun the breathing, you've done all the self-myofascial release, we've got engagement, both the front side and the back side. We're feeling really fucking good now. Things are starting to work. Hopefully you're feeling really fucking good, sorry. But you're making progress in some way or another. And just by being disciplined and doing everything you've done thus far, you should really give yourself an applause, because doing all those things, sticking to those things on a weekly basis is tough. And when you're in pain, it's gonna take that consistency. So just keep doing it. And all of this now, what I'm about to teach you, is one of the most important things in truly, truly correcting what's gone wrong with your movement or with your posture. Back pain arises because of something going wrong in our life as far as movement goes or posture goes. So if I'm sitting for a long period of time at work, more likely than not, as I mentioned before in one of the first videos, your tissues here are getting stuck, and then you go and stand, it forces my back into hyperextension, shit stops working well, pain arises, okay? So you corrected all that, you rolled all that, everything's feeling good, you're activated. But if you go back and sit again for 8 hours a day without moving, the same thing's gonna happen. You're just gonna be a little stronger now. You're still stuck here, you're gonna have to keep fighting for all that on a daily basis. You're always fighting your posture at work or wherever it is. So what we need to do now is correct what's going wrong outside of the gym, okay? Now, there are 3 positions that I'm gonna kind of teach you that are probably the most helpful in how you're holding yourself outside of the gym or holding yourself in life. We'll talk about movement in the next chapter, the next progression. This is how you're holding yourself though. So the first one we're gonna talk about is sitting, because we're all doing it so much. So I got this chair here. And what I'm offering in these videos is how you can prevent so much damage when you're holding yourself in certain positions, okay? So sometimes you can't get around sitting. I just drove to Oregon and back, 8 hours both ways, got back is super sore. But there are ways that when I was driving, that I could kind of alleviate some pain and also work on my mobility at the same time. Now, one of the easiest things to do is very simply, you've heard this before, when you're sitting or standing, pull the shoulder blades back, okay? Not up, but back. It's kind of a down and back too, so I'm just going back and down. Sometimes having your hands at your side is really helpful, and turning the thumbs out, kind of anatomical position style. If you're sitting at a desk and you have space along your side, that could be pretty helpful. Just opening your hands up, okay? If you're in a car, you really can't do that, but you can practice. As my hands are here on the steering wheel, I'm pulling my shoulders down and back, not forward and up. It takes a lot of practice, but you're just gonna keep them down a little bit more relaxed as your hand is on the wheel, or even better, if your hands are lower on the wheel, that'll allow you to keep your elbows down a little bit more and shoulders down and relax a little bit more. So in doing this with the shoulders, I've already begun to open my chest and open my body. Another huge part of the posture and how you're holding yourself, and yes, all of this affects the low back. If I'm crouching because my shoulders are tightened forward, it will eventually stress the low back, okay? Even the head, which is this next piece. So I'm here, I have my shoulders down and back. To align the neck, I'm pulling my chin back to make a double chin, and you'll notice that my mouth is closed. I like to keep the tongue on the roof of the mouth as well. Looks like this. And in doing that, it's actually kind of a nice exercise. It is semi-active, all of these are, is I get a nice little traction right at the base of my skull, because I'm actually stretching this area. If my posture is bad, my shoulders are being pulled forward like this, what tends to happen with the neck is the neck will have to be up and flexed in this position, or I should say extended in this position, and the chin will be up. I'm sure you've seen tons of people with posture like this, where they're hunched forward, their head is up, they got a rounded spine, okay? So to begin to correct all that, as I mentioned, shoulder blades back, now pulling the chin back. Double chin. I know it's not super sexy. You don't need to do it all the time, but if you're at work or you're driving, just pull it back a little bit. Now, as far as what you're doing with the actual lower half of your body is more difficult. So some of us are super tight in the hamstrings and they can't do what I'm about to offer, which would be stick your tailbone out behind you more. I did this little anterior, it's called an anterior pelvic tilt, where I'm sticking my butt back behind me. That's hard for me because I have tight hamstrings. But you want to do that just a little bit while keeping your abs semi-engaged, just so you can see the height and the posture in holding this position. Now, for some of us, this would be appropriate just to stay tall. Now, and by some of us, I mean especially me, this is how I need to hold myself. Now, there are some of us that naturally sit hyperextended. So they're already sitting really arched in their back. If you're sitting like this, your back is super arched when you're seated, you want to do the opposite. I'm going to pull my rib cage down, a posterior pelvic tilt like we practice on the ground. So now I've pulled this down here to engage this and align my lumbar spine that way. So this particular sitting position, the adjustment of the hips and back here really depends on how you're sitting. So I'll review just really quickly. If you're sitting hyperextended like this, you want to pull the rib cage down, tuck the tailbone under a little bit, and align the spine that way. If you're sitting really round in the spine, which is actually how I tend to sit, rounded like that, I'm kind of slooping into the seat, then you want to go the opposite direction and stick your tailbone behind you, pull the ribs up a little bit, keeping the abs engaged. Now I'm taller in that lumbar spine. Meanwhile, you're keeping all of the shoulders, neck, everything there at the same time. The very last piece that I'll offer is kind of what you're doing with your knees. Your knees kind of control how your hips are engaging or disengaging. You're going to activate your glute medius by driving your knees out. So if I keep my feet planted, my toes engaged, okay, and I push my knees out, and I keep them actively pushing out like that as I'm seated in this nice active position, you're firing your glutes and you're not doing that much, okay? So just push them out, stay tall in that position, got glutes firing, everything else firing to stay tall, and you're set in a nice stable position. If you want to hang out in a little bit of figure four, really simple stretch that you could do, pulling the chin back, shoulder blades down. That's one of the things that I like to do if I'm sitting for a long period of time to open the glute and hip. Okay, so we got sitting, probably what a majority of you guys are doing at work. If you have to sit, these are things to consider. If you can stand, definitely choose a standing desk and do other things in a standing position, which we're going to talk about right now as far as standing goes. So the standing position relates to everything we've talked about so far. We've talked about how our spine is coordinated in any position, right? So seated, some people sit arched, some people sit slouched. The same thing happens when we're standing. So some people, when they're relaxed, they'll just kind of hang on their spine frame like this, where they're just kind of relaxed. When I talk to people about standing or walking or running, many different exercises, we're always considering keeping our tailbone kind of under our body and our rib cage down. So now I'm standing with this aligned spine, the posterior pelvic tilt, like we practice on the ground. I'm squeezing my glutes under and pulling my ribs down a little bit. Now, with gravity acting upon us a little bit more, we have a lot of different things going on with our shoulders too. So I'm kind of keeping my glutes under me, pulling my rib cage down, but now I have my shoulder blades back and my chin tucked. Now, I don't expect you to stand around like this. You know, you're at a concert, watching the concert, and you're like, huh, super stiff like that. But generally speaking, this is the alignment of the spine that you're looking for to stay engaged and prevent the pinching in the back. When you're in low back pain, you need to set aside looking ridiculous. All of these corrections in the posture are something you need to practice as much as you can. So who cares what anybody else thinks? Practice these things, have a little bit of fun with it. So standing, tailbone under, rib cage down, shoulder blades back. You can open the palms if you practice standing. Pull the chin back. That's alignment. Now, what I see a lot of people do, also, this is one thing that really affects the hips and therefore the spine, is, and I see this a lot in women, not to generalize, but it is very common, is that we'll kind of turn a foot out and drop a knee in and rest on one hip like this. And I cringe every time I see it. So now standing on one leg is not bad. You can stand on one leg, but notice when I stand on one leg, I'm not leaning. Take the foot off the ground and you can stand like this. If you stand on one leg, doing anything, you could be at work and put your foot on a stool like this. This is one of the best things you could do at work while working. You're keeping a good posture because this leg is nice and straight, this glute is engaged, and it kind of sets your hips in the right position. And then you would just consider what your shoulders are doing, making sure your abs are engaged and your neck is aligned, rather than kind of this relaxed, kind of knee collapsing, body sliding position, okay? Also, one thing to consider is what your feet are doing. Your feet are a really important indicator of how your hips are working. If my feet are turned out like this, it's kind of telling me, at least, because I'm seeing your feet, it's telling us something about your body. And when the feet are turned out, it's telling me that your hips are extremely tight because you're limited in the expression of proper alignment. So when your hips are tight and your glutes aren't working properly, it'll very, very rapidly, or you've already gotten there, pull your toes out like this. Similarly, but dissimilarly, feet can go in, and that's telling me there's disengagement in your hips. So your hips are really loose and probably too mobile, and you're not engaged properly in the hips, so you're kind of in this loose, pigeon-toed position as opposed to the duck-footed position. So always try to stand with parallel feet and with your feet directly under your hips. Not too wide, not 1 foot out, not 1 foot in, okay? Parallel, and everything else I already suggested. Now, the very last piece of the postural reset as far as the habitual patterns go, you're trying to add all this into your life. You're considering what I'm looking like when I'm sitting, what I'm looking like when I'm standing. And I do realize a lot of these things are unconscious and you don't even realize you're doing them. Just over time, try to pay attention, whether it's just first how you're standing or first how you're sitting, just be aware. The last piece is how you're laying. When I had really bad back issues, I couldn't lay for 10 to 15 minutes without my back just screaming at me. And that tends to be because when we're sleeping or when we're laying, we're very relaxed. And when we're very relaxed, our back relaxes into an arched position. So when you're sitting or laying on your back is one of the worst things that you can do because it's going to force you into hyperextension. You'll see, especially if your hips are tight, that when my legs are straight, a little bit of my back is off the ground. There's a little bit of space here. So if you're laying and not sleeping, whatever you're laying and doing aside from sleeping, try to keep your feet slid in. That's going to help a lot. And then we've gone over lifting your feet and putting your feet on walls, okay? It's kind of hard to watch TV when laying flat on the ground like that, but that can be helpful. And as far as sleeping goes, if you're sleeping, you can't control any of this, right? So I actually slept in a foam wedge for 3 months to sleep in a position where my legs were elevated like this and my chest was elevated like this. So I was sleeping in a completely relaxed position for both my hips and my chest, rather than in a fully opened, kind of vulnerable low back position. And it helped a lot, but because I didn't have any of the other stuff coordinated, it didn't help long term. So when you're sleeping, you want to try to lay on your side optimally. And when you're laying on your side, you want to try to have something in between your knees. So this is my pillow here. And you're going to have a pillow or something, a body pillow, something that you could put a stuffed animal for anybody who has those, not me, in between your knees there. And obviously I'm sleeping, okay, so I have that there. What this does, you'll see if I take it away, my knee will come down and it causes this little bit of rotation in my spine, okay? But if my hips stay open with a pillow, it allows my lumbar spine to stay nice and stacked on itself and not twisted. When this knee comes down, my low back will twist down and forward. So definitely try to get something to put in between the knees. This will help a lot. Super comfy. So, oh, and if you're a stomach sleeper, say goodbye to your back. No, I'm just kidding. Definitely consider a different position if you're a stomach sleeper and experiencing low back pain. Now, who am I to tell you how to sleep, right? Sleeping is like this really sacred, important thing, and we all have habits that have developed over the course of our lives, but you also have a pain that is limiting you to enjoy your life. So if you have to make a little adjustment, whether it's sitting differently, standing differently, sleeping differently, if you correct that habit and kind of work through the discomfort of it, it's going to pay off in taking away the discomfort of the low back pain, which is super worth it, right? Because you can't do anything, you can't have any fun in how you're limited with all the low back pain, as you know. So as you go forward now for this next week, be very aware of how you're holding yourself in all these positions, and hopefully you're still using some of the techniques, some of the exercises we've done before. You'll notice in the programming below that you will see how to use those things as you're going along with these things. So go stand funny, pull your shoulder blades back, pull your chin back, and get it.